So I'm speaking with Ed Marshall. It is the 23rd of April, 2018. Morning, Ed.
Good morning.
Is it Ed or Ted? I've been calling you Ed as long as I can remember.
That's right. Well, I have this sort of schizophrenic personality. What happened was when I was a child, family always called me Ted, and all through my teen years. But when I started work at CBC, I got a supervisor who couldn't quite figure it out, and if it was Edward, it should be Ed.
Mm-hmm.
So he started calling me Ed, and I realized if I got a phone call on my day off, and Eva took it or something, and they asked for Ed, we knew exactly who it was calling. You see. So I figured this was not such a bad thing. So we let it go, and then it sort of became like a snowball down a hill and reached the point eventually where I was completely schizophrenic. I'd answer the phone and I wouldn't know who I was. And still I get, for all sort of professional work and CBC related and stuff like that, it's Ed. I still get, family still calls me Ted, and in the sort of all the brass band world and the Salvation Army circles and all that sort of thing, I still get Ted.
You're Ted.
So at this point, I'm completely schizophrenic. I answer to both.
But you always answer to Marshall.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
You already alluded to family and beginnings and so forth. Tell me about that. Where were you born?
I was born in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Toronto Grace Hospital. And basically lived my whole life in Toronto, except for about 4 years where my parents entered the ministry. They became Salvation Army officers sort of late in life. I was 13 when they were commissioned,
mm-hmm.
and spent the next 4 years out in Alberta. We had 3 years in Alberta, which was really lovely. I enjoyed that.
What part of Alberta?
Fort Macleod, near Lethbridge. And the next time they moved us to Saskatchewan, North Battleford. And I took 1 year of that and I left home. Came back to Toronto.
Uh-huh. And did your parents eventually move back to Toronto as well?
Yeah, when they retired.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, they went from North Battleford. The next appointment was Montreal, and next appointment was Prince Edward Island, and then back to Cobourg, and then to headquarters in Toronto,
mm-hmm.
after that, and then retired in Toronto.
Siblings? Brothers and sisters?
Yeah, 2 sisters, Sandra and Linda, both younger than me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So a good family life.
Oh yes, yeah, very definitely, and extended family. We were always very close. All the cousins and aunts and uncles, and family get-togethers were always a very big thing.
Obviously,
when I came back to Toronto, I lived with my grandparents for a while. Actually, I rented a basement apartment with my grandparents until I got married, and then finally moved out on my own.
Your family originally came from the UK, I imagine.
Yeah. The on the one side, they came from down around Dover area, and the other side was up around Lincoln. And on one side, they came several generations ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at my wife because she's the genealogist here. 6 generations on the one side. On my mother's side, they came over quite early. On my father's side, they came after the war, didn't they?
Oh yes.
My grandfather and grandmother came over. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you been over there to trace your roots?
Oh yeah, several times. Yeah, we still have family over there, and we're in touch with them pretty much all the time.
And Eva has Scandinavian roots, right?
That's right,
Yeah.
Swedish.
Exactly.
So,
You've been there on
so we've been there a number of times
exactly.
also. Yeah.
It's wonderful. So your Salvation Army background, music's pretty important. Always
right,
was in your family?
Oh, yes. Yeah, my father was a bandmaster. And when I was about 7, I was presented with this cornet. And my father was a cornet player, and he was determined I was going to play the cornet. And it took about 3 years for him to really discover that I was not going to become a cornet player. And I can remember one Tuesday night after the junior band practice, my father and several of the older fellows from the senior band took me down the band room and said, "Look, you got to play something. So if it's not going to be a cornet, what?" And we basically went through the band room, and they gave me a euphonium and a horn and a flugelhorn, and I didn't like any of them. So finally they were exasperated. They said, "You got to play something." And I said, "Well, let me try trombone, And it was like a duck to water. I took to the trombone, and I mean, in those days, I had to use my foot to do the water key at the end of the slide. I couldn't reach the water key to let the water out. But no, I guess I was about 11, I think, when I started trombone, and that was it. That was the rest of my life.
Played in Salvation Army bands?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the big band. When I left home and came back to Toronto, I wanted to get in one of the major bands. So I went to Earl's Court Citadel, which was the top band in the country, basically. Got in, and we did a lot of touring. And in fact, we were the Canadian representatives at the Congress in London in 1965, the Salvation Army's 100th, the Centennial Congress. And that's where I met Eva. So we often joke that it's a band trip that I'm still paying for.
So Eva is Army background as well?
Not completely. She was the only one in her family that was. Her family grew up in the state church, and her grandmother was quite adamant.
In Sweden, that would have been Lutheran, right?
Lutheran, right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Eva's mother got connected to the Army through Girl Guides, but her mother, Eva's grandmother, forbid her to leave the state church to go. But she had warm feelings there, and then when Eva started coming up and had friends, Eva started going to the Army, and grandmother was not that happy at all. I think she came around afterwards, later in life. But so actually, on Eva's side, she's the only one in her family that was connected to the Army.
Okay. Does Eva play an instrument as well?
No, no. She used to play. When she was in Sweden, she used to play in the string bands. They didn't have like normal choirs there. They would have a choir, but every other member played guitar, and they'd have a double bass and things like that. The Swedish string bands. And quite an interesting music tradition there, and she played that. But she these days she just says she's a listener. She's an audience member, which is very important.
It really is.
Yeah,
It's very important. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.